The night the storm knocked out the power, Armin never imagined he'd end up sharing a bed with the one woman who could end his career with a single word. Yet there he was, standing in the pale glow of emergency lights, soaked to the bone, gripping his worn jacket, while the city's most feared CEO shut the door behind them and turned the lock. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unexpected moments, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Truly helps stories like this reach more hearts. Armin had spent years mastering the art of going unnoticed. As a single father raising his 6-year-old daughter, Mir, every choice he made was built around one thing: survival. He worked brutal hours as a maintenance supervisor in a luxury corporate building he could never dream of living in. The employees barely registered his existence, and honestly, he liked it that way. Staying off the radar meant keeping his job, and keeping his job meant keeping food on the table and his daughter in school. That evening had started like any other, right up until the storm rolled in. The rain came down in walls of water, flooding streets and cutting power across half the city. Elevators died, offices cleared out, and panic rippled through the building. Armin had been called in to help manage the emergency, walking stranded employees down stairwells and making sure the backup systems were holding. That was when he first really saw her. Sanaa Rahman, the CEO. A woman known for her razor-sharp efficiency and standards that nobody could ever quite meet. She moved through every room like a warning. People stood taller and spoke quieter the moment she walked in. Armin had only ever caught glimpses of her from across the lobby, all sharp heels and sharper eyes. But here, in the flickering hallway light, she looked different. Not weak, just human. Stranded like everybody else. The storm kept getting worse, trapping them all inside. Streets were underwater, phone signals were cutting in and out, and the building's emergency protocol required essential staff to stay through the night. Sanaa, despite everything her title could have gotten her, refused to leave while her people were still in the building. That was the first crack in the story Armin had always heard about her. With most rooms already taken and options running thin, decisions got made fast. Armin was assigned to one of the executive suites to oversee operations and make sure everything kept running. There was just one problem. One bed. Armin offered to take the floor without a second thought. But the marble was ice cold, and Sanaa's response was firm, though not harsh. The situation was what it was, and practicality had to win over pride. A wide bed, split by distance and silence, would do just fine. The room felt heavy once the door clicked shut. Outside, thunder cracked like a warning shot, while inside, the air sat thick with awkwardness. Armin stayed glued to his side, careful and quiet, trying not to even breathe too loud. His mind drifted to Mir, home alone with a neighbor, probably curled up scared of the storm. He wanted to call her, just to hear her voice and tell her it was all going to be okay. But the network was down, and there was nothing he could do but wait. Hours crawled by. Sleep wouldn't come. Sometime past midnight, when the storm had eased into a low, steady rain, Armin heard something that stopped him cold. A quiet sound. Not tossing and turning, not restlessness, crying. Soft, barely there, but real. He figured at first he was hearing things. The CEO didn't seem like someone who cried. She seemed like she was cut from something harder than most people, untouchable, unbothered by anything as fragile as tears. But then he heard it again. Soft, broken, real. Armin sat with it for a moment. This wasn't his lane. His whole life had been about reading the room, knowing when to disappear, when to keep his mouth shut. But something about that sound got to him. It wasn't performance. It wasn't someone looking for sympathy. It was the kind of crying people do when they're sure nobody's watching. Before he could talk himself out of it, he spoke. Quietly, carefully, keeping his voice low so she'd have room to pretend she hadn't heard him if she wanted to. He told her she didn't have to act like everything was fine. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Long enough that Armin was sure he'd made a mistake. Then, slowly, it broke. Not with words, but with one long, shaky breath. When Sanaa finally spoke, her voice was nothing like the one she used to run meetings. It was quieter, stripped down, almost unfamiliar. She admitted she hadn't slept right in months, that her father had built the company from nothing, and when he died, everything landed on her. That every call she made got picked apart. That people looked right through her, they didn't see a person, they saw a title, a chair, a symbol. And then she said the thing that hit Armin somewhere deep. She said she was terrified of letting him down. Armin lay there in the dark, letting her words settle over him. There was something almost surreal about hearing someone that powerful say something that honest. Fear, pressure, loneliness. He knew every one of those feelings. Not the same way, not from the same place, but enough to recognize them. He told her about Mir, about losing his wife, about lying awake wondering if he was doing enough for his daughter, about jobs that wrung him dry, day after day, and never once complaining because he simply couldn't afford to fall apart. He didn't expect her to say much back, but she did. And somewhere in that back and forth something shifted. The wall between them, built from money, position, and everything life had handed them differently, started coming down brick by brick. They weren't talking as CEO and maintenance man anymore. They were just two people who had been carrying too much alone for too long. By the time the rain finally quit and the city went quiet, neither of them felt like strangers. Morning came in slow and easy. Soft gold light pushed through the curtains like the world was giving itself a fresh start. Armin woke first, moving carefully so he wouldn't wake her. He stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the city below, and felt something he couldn't quite name. Not dramatic, not life-changing in any obvious way, just different. Quieter somehow. Settled. When Sana woke, there were no traces of the night before on her face. But there was something else sitting in the room with them, something low and steady. Acknowledgement. Respect. The storm had put them in the same four walls, but it had also pulled back a curtain neither of them had planned to open. The day snapped back to normal fast. Power came on, people headed home, and the building shook off the night like it never happened. But for Armin, something had stayed. A week later, he got called up to the CEO's office. His stomach dropped. He ran through every possible version of what was coming. A write-up, a warning, getting let go for stepping out of line. Instead, Sana offered him a promotion. Not out of guilt, not out of pity, but because she'd seen exactly who he was that night. His steadiness, his integrity, the quiet way he carried responsibility without making it anyone else's problem. She told him the company needed more people built like that. Armin didn't have words for it right away. He'd lived inside struggle for so long that opportunity felt foreign, like something meant for someone else. But he said yes. For Mir. For the future he'd almost given up on picturing. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something loosen in his chest. Hope. In the weeks that followed, their paths crossed more often. Not always in conversation, but in the small, quiet way people acknowledge each other when they've shared something real. A glance. A brief exchange, a mutual understanding that didn't need to be spelled out. They never brought up that night again. They didn't have to, because some moments don't need to be revisited to stay with you. They just need to have been real. If this story moved you in any way, take a moment to like, share, and drop a comment. It keeps stories like this going and puts them in front of people who might need them. And before we get to the end, here's something for you. Comment the word hope below if you believe that even the darkest nights can crack open into something new. Months later, on a quiet evening, Armin walked home with Mir, her small hand wrapped tight around his. The sky had cleared out completely, the air calm and easy, like the storm had been somebody else's memory. But he knew better, because sometimes it takes getting knocked sideways to end up somewhere worth being. And sometimes the last person you'd ever expect to understand you turns out to be the one who actually listens. That night had started with cold floors, awkward silence, and no good options. But it had ended with something that didn't have a price tag. Connection. And in a world that spends so much time reminding people how different they are from each other, that kind of connection means everything. Armin looked down at his daughter, grinning as she rattled on about her day, her laughter easy and free. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just getting through it. He was living. And somewhere up in a high-rise office with a view of the whole city, A CEO who had once felt completely alone stood just a little lighter on her feet. Because one night, while a storm raged outside, somebody had actually listened. And sometimes that's the whole thing right there.